When Ryan met Ethan Chance meeting in New York. Ryan Miller had always imagined New York City differently. Before moving there, he had seen countless pictures of Manhattan's bright streets, crowded sidewalks, yellow taxis, and towering buildings. He imagined the city would make him feel free. Instead, during his first few weeks there, Ryan mostly felt like a stranger surrounded by millions of people. At 22, Ryan had moved to New York after accepting a new job at a small design company. He had left behind his old neighborhood, familiar friends, and the comfortable routine he had known for years. His new apartment was small, but Ryan didn't mind. He believed that starting over meant accepting a little uncertainty. That evening, however, the city had something unexpected waiting for him. It had been raining since late afternoon. Ryan had finished work later than usual and was walking through Manhattan when the rain suddenly became heavier. He looked around for somewhere to take shelter. A few seconds later, he noticed a small café glowing warmly between two larger buildings. Ryan quickly crossed the street and pushed open the door. A bell rang above him. The cafe was quiet and comfortable. Soft music played in the background, and only a few customers were sitting at the tables. Ryan shook the rain from his jacket and looked for an empty seat. Long day. Ryan turned. A young man was standing near the counter, holding a cup of coffee. He had dark hair, a friendly smile, and an easygoing expression. Yeah, Ryan replied with a small laugh. Very long. The stranger pointed toward an empty chair. You can sit here if you want. Most of the tables are taken. Ryan looked around. There were actually several empty tables. You mean that one? The stranger glanced behind him. Oh, right. Ryan laughed. The stranger smiled. I guess I wasn't paying attention. Ryan sat down, and the young man returned to his table. For a few minutes, neither of them said anything. Ryan watched the rain running down the window. He had always liked rainy weather, but tonight it made him feel unusually thoughtful. Then the stranger spoke again. You're new here, aren't you? Ryan looked at him. How did you know? You have that look. What look? Though I don't know where anything is look. Ryan smiled. Is it that obvious? A little. The stranger laughed. I met on. Ryan. They shook hands. It was a simple introduction, but Ryan found himself smiling afterward. Ethan asked where Ryan had moved from, and Ryan explained that he had recently relocated to New York for work. That's a big change, Ethan said. It is. Do you like it so far? Ryan thought for a moment. I haven't decided yet. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That's not very positive. I like the city. I'm just still trying to understand it. Give it time. Ryan looked toward the window. Have you lived here your whole life? No, I grew up in Boston. I moved here a few years ago. So you understand the feeling. Exactly. Their conversation continued naturally. They talked about work, favorite movies, food, and the places they had visited around New York. Ethan seemed to know the city surprisingly well. You been to Central Park? Ryan shook his head. Not yet. Then you're missing one of the best parts of the city. I've been busy. That's what everyone says. Ryan smiled. Ethan picked up his coffee. You should go sometime. Maybe I will. Maybe. Ryan laughed. Okay, I will. Outside, the rain continued falling, but neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave. Ryan realized something strange. He had entered the cafe because he wanted to escape the rain. Now he was enjoying the conversation so much that he almost wished the rain would continue. Eventually, Ethan checked the time. I should probably get going. Ryan nodded. Yeah, me too. They stood up almost at the same time. For a moment, neither knew what to say. Then Ethan smiled. You're going to need a better tour guide if you're going to survive New York. Ryan smiled back. Are you volunteering? Maybe. Ryan laughed. Ethan pulled out his phone. Give me your number. I'll send you a list of places you should visit. Ryan hesitated for only a second before giving it to him. A few moments later, Ethan's phone buzzed. Got it. Ryan put his phone away. Thanks. Anytime. They walked toward the entrance together. When Ryan opened the door, the rain had become lighter. Ethan stopped beside him. Ryan, yeah. How about Central Park this weekend? Ryan looked at him. Is that part of the official tour? Ethan smiled. First stop. Ryan nodded. Okay, Saturday. Saturday. They exchanged one last smile before going in different directions. Ryan walked down the wet sidewalk, his hands in his jacket pockets. He didn't know much about Ethan. He didn't know where this new friendship would lead. He didn't even know why he felt unusually happy after such a simple meeting. But as the lights of Manhattan reflected on the wet streets, Ryan realized that his first real connection in New York had happened completely by accident. He had entered a cafe to escape the rain. Instead, he had met Ethan. And somehow, Ryan had a feeling that he would remember that evening for a very long time. Saturday arrived sooner than Ryan expected. For most of the week, he had been busy with work, but Ethan's message had remained in the back of his mind. Central Park, 2 p.m. Don't be late. Ryan smiled when he read it that morning. He had never expected that moving to New York would lead to meeting someone so quickly. Ethan was still technically a new friend, but there was something about their conversations that felt unusually easy. At 2 o'clock, Ryan reached Central Park. Ethan was already there, standing near the entrance with 2 cups of coffee. "You're early," Ethan said. Ryan looked at his watch. "By 3 minutes. That's early in New York." Ryan laughed. Ethan handed him a coffee. "I remembered how you take it." Ryan looked surprised. "You remembered?" "Of course." It was a small thing, but Ryan appreciated it. They began walking through the park. Ethan pointed out different landmarks and told Ryan stories about the city. Sometimes he talked so enthusiastically that Ryan could barely keep up. Eventually, they sat on a bench overlooking the trees. "So," Ethan said, "how's the new job?" "Better than I expected. Still stressful, though." "That's normal." Ryan looked at him. "You make everything sound simple. Maybe because I'm not the one doing it." They both laughed. Ryan slowly became more comfortable talking about himself. He told Ethan about his plans for the future and how difficult it had been to leave his old life behind. Ethan listened without interrupting. When Ryan finished, Ethan said, "Starting over isn't easy, but sometimes you need a new place to discover what you really want." Ryan thought about those words. Maybe you're right. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking around the park. Over the next few weeks, their friendship grew naturally. Sometimes Ethan would send Ryan a message asking if he wanted to get coffee. Other times Ryan would suggest exploring a new neighborhood. They visited Brooklyn one weekend and walked along the waterfront. Another evening, they explored a busy street in Manhattan and stopped at a small restaurant for dinner. Ryan began discovering the city through Ethan's eyes. But more importantly, he began discovering Ethan. Ethan loved photography. He carried a small camera almost everywhere and enjoyed taking pictures of ordinary moments, people walking through the streets, buildings reflecting sunlight, and quiet corners that most people ignored. One afternoon, Ryan asked, "Why do you take pictures of things nobody notices?" Ethan looked through his camera. "Because ordinary moments become memories." Ryan smiled. "That's actually a good answer. I have those sometimes." Ryan laughed. Their friendship became something Ryan depended on. When Ryan had a difficult day at work, Ethan was usually the person he wanted to talk to. When Ethan was worried about his own future, Ryan listened. Neither of them realized exactly when the friendship had started becoming deeper. But Ryan noticed the change first. One evening, they were sitting outside a cafe in Brooklyn. Ethan was telling a funny story about a mistake he had made at work. Ryan laughed harder than the story deserved. Ethan stopped talking. "What?" Ryan shook his head. "Nothing." "You're staring." "I am not." "You definitely are." Ryan looked away, embarrassed. He suddenly realized how much he enjoyed being around Ethan. It wasn't simply because Ethan was funny or kind. Ryan felt understood when he was with him. That realization frightened him. He wondered whether Ethan felt the same way. But he didn't ask. He was afraid that asking might change everything. A few days later, Ethan invited Ryan to a small photography exhibition. The exhibition was held in a quiet gallery in Manhattan. Ryan walked slowly through the rooms while Ethan explained some of the photographs. At one point, Ryan stopped in front of a picture of 2 people standing on opposite sides of a city street. "What do you think of this one?" Ethan asked. Ryan studied it. "It feels like they're waiting for each other." Ethan looked at the photograph again. "That's exactly what I thought." Ryan turned toward him. For a moment, neither said anything. Then Ethan smiled and changed the subject. After the exhibition, they walked through the city. The evening was cool, and the streets were filled with people. Ethan suddenly said, "I'm glad I met you." Ryan looked at him. "Really?" "Yeah." Ethan continued walking. "New York can feel lonely sometimes. Having someone you can actually talk to makes a difference." Ryan smiled. "You can always talk to me." Ethan nodded. "I know." Those 2 words stayed with Ryan. Later that week, they met in Central Park again. They sat beneath a large tree while the sun slowly disappeared behind the buildings. Ethan looked thoughtful. Ryan, yeah. Do you ever think some people enter your life at exactly the right time? Ryan looked at him. Sometimes. I think meeting you was like that. Ryan didn't know what to say. His heart felt strangely heavy and hopeful at the same time. He wanted to tell Ethan what he had been feeling, but fear stopped him. What if Ethan only saw him as a friend? What if Ryan said too much and lost the friendship they had built? So instead, he simply smiled. I'm glad we met too. Ethan smiled back. Neither of them said anything more. As the evening grew darker, the two friends remained there, talking about their dreams and the future. Ryan knew something had changed between them. He just wasn't ready to give it a name. For now, he was content to have Ethan beside him. But deep down, Ryan knew that his feelings were becoming harder to ignore. And soon, he would have to decide whether keeping the truth hidden was safer than finally being honest. For the next few days, Ryan tried not to think too much about what Ethan had said in Central Park. I think meeting you was like that. The words kept returning to him whenever he was alone. Ryan wanted to believe Ethan felt the same connection he did. But uncertainty had a way of turning small questions into huge doubts. Then, one Friday evening, something happened that made those doubts even stronger. Ryan had finished work early and decided to surprise Ethan at a cafe where they sometimes met. When he arrived, he saw Ethan sitting at a table near the window. Ethan wasn't alone. Another young man was sitting across from him. They were talking and laughing. Ryan stopped near the entrance. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but Ethan looked completely comfortable. Ryan suddenly felt embarrassed for even coming. He turned around before Ethan could notice him and walked back outside. The cold evening air hit his face. Ryan told himself that he was being unreasonable. Ethan was allowed to have other friends. They weren't officially anything more than friends. Still, the sight stayed in Ryan's mind. Over the weekend, Ethan sent him several messages. Are you okay? You disappeared yesterday. Did I do something? Ryan stared at the screen, but didn't know how to answer. Finally, he typed, I'm just busy. Ethan replied almost immediately. You don't seem like yourself. Ryan put his phone down. He didn't want to lie to Ethan, but he wasn't ready to explain the truth either. For several days, Ryan became distant. He stopped suggesting places to visit. He answered messages with short replies. When Ethan asked if he wanted to meet, Ryan always seemed to have an excuse. Ethan eventually stopped asking. That hurt more than Ryan expected. One evening, Ryan was sitting alone in his apartment when someone knocked on the door. He already knew who it was. When he opened the door, Ethan stood outside. We need to talk. Ryan stepped aside. Ethan entered, but remained standing. What's going on? Nothing. Ryan, please don't say nothing. Ryan looked away. Ethan took a breath. Did I do something wrong? No. Then why have you been avoiding me? Ryan didn't answer. The silence grew uncomfortable. Finally, Ethan said, If I've hurt you somehow, I deserve to know. Ryan shook his head. You didn't hurt me. Then what is it? Ryan sat down. Ethan waited. Ryan knew he couldn't avoid the conversation anymore. I saw you at the cafe. Ethan looked confused. When? Friday. Realization appeared on Ethan's face. The person I was with? Ryan nodded. Who was he? His name is Michael. He's an old friend. Ryan looked down. I know I shouldn't have assumed anything. Ethan sat across from him. Then what did you assume? Ryan hesitated. He had spent weeks trying to hide his feelings, but now the truth felt impossible to hold inside. I thought maybe you liked him. Ethan looked surprised. Why? Because you seemed happy together. Ethan shook his head. Ryan, Michael was asking me about a photography project. That's all. Ryan felt embarrassed. I know that now. But that's not the real reason you pulled away, is it? Ryan remained silent. Ethan's voice became softer. Tell me the real reason. Ryan took a slow breath. There were many ways he could have answered. He could have changed the subject. He could have laughed it off. He could have told Ethan that he was simply stressed. But none of those answers would have been honest. So Ryan finally said what he had been afraid to say. I care about you. Ethan nodded. I know, more than I should. Ethan didn't interrupt. Ryan continued. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was that first night at the cafe. Maybe it was later. But somewhere along the way, you became more important to me than I expected. His voice became quieter, and that scared me. Ethan looked at him carefully. Why? Because I didn't want to lose you. Ryan looked down at his hands. I thought if I told you how I felt, everything between us might change. For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. Ryan prepared himself for the possibility that he had made a terrible mistake. Then Ethan spoke. You should have told me sooner. Ryan looked up. What? Ethan smiled gently. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you the same thing. Ryan stared at him. You mean? I mean that you're not the only one who started feeling something different. Ryan couldn't believe what he was hearing. Why didn't you say anything? Ethan laughed quietly. For the same reason you didn't. Ryan smiled. So we were both afraid. Apparently. The tension that had filled the room finally disappeared. Ryan felt lighter. Not because everything had suddenly become simple, but because the uncertainty was gone. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I don't want us to rush into anything. Ryan nodded. Neither do I. We've built a good friendship. I know, and I don't want to lose that. Ryan smiled. Me neither. They talked for a long time that evening. They discussed what they wanted from the future, what worried them, and how strange it was that two people who had met by accident could become so important to each other. There were no dramatic promises, no perfect answers, just honesty. Before Ethan left, he stood at the door and turned toward Ryan. I'm glad you finally told me. Ryan smiled. I'm glad you came over. Ethan nodded. Good night, Ryan. Good night. After Ethan left, Ryan stood by the window and watched the city lights. A few weeks earlier, he had arrived in New York feeling completely alone. Now, he had someone who understood him, someone he trusted, someone who had become an important part of his life. Ryan knew the road ahead might not always be easy, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what came next, because Ethan knew the truth, and Ethan had stayed. The next morning, Ryan woke to a message from Ethan. Central Park? Same place where we started figuring everything out? Ryan smiled at the screen. He typed back. I'll be there. Outside, New York was already awake. Cars moved through the streets. People hurried toward work. The city continued at its usual impossible speed. But for Ryan, something had changed. The stranger he had met on a rainy evening was no longer a stranger. Ethan had become someone he could trust. And now, for the first time, they could discover what their connection truly meant, together, one step at a time. The next morning, Ryan arrived at Central Park a few minutes early. The city was already busy. People hurried along the sidewalks, cyclists passed through the park, and the sounds of New York filled the air. But Ryan barely noticed any of it. He was thinking about Ethan. For the first time since moving to New York, Ryan felt as though he had finally found someone who understood him. A few minutes later, Ethan appeared with 2 cups of coffee. You're early again, Ethan said. Ryan smiled. Maybe I'm getting used to New York. Or maybe you're getting used to meeting me. Ryan laughed. Maybe both. They began walking through the park. There was something different between them now. Their friendship had always been comfortable, but after their conversation the night before, there was a new honesty between them. Neither felt the need to pretend anymore. They talked about ordinary things at first. Work, food, movies, the strange weather. Then Ethan became quiet. What are you thinking about? Ryan asked. The future. Ryan smiled. That's a big topic for 9 in the morning. Ethan laughed. I know. They stopped near a small bridge and watched the water below. When I first moved to New York, Ethan said, I thought I had everything figured out. Did you? Not even close. Ryan smiled. Me neither. Ethan looked at him. Maybe that's okay. Ryan nodded. I think it is. They continued walking. Over the next few weeks, their relationship developed naturally. They didn't try to define everything immediately. Instead, they spent time together and allowed themselves to understand what they were becoming. Ryan introduced Ethan to some of his favorite places. Ethan took Ryan to a photography exhibition he had been waiting to visit. They explored Brooklyn, walked through Manhattan, and sometimes simply sat in a cafe, talking for hours. The city that once seemed enormous and lonely to Ryan began to feel familiar. He had places he liked now. He had memories. And most importantly, he had someone to share them with. One evening, Ethan invited Ryan to the same cafe where they had first met. Ryan recognized the place immediately. The beginning, he said. Ethan smiled. Exactly. They chose the same area near the window. Outside, The streets were wet from an earlier rain. Ryan looked at the window and remembered that first evening. I still can't believe we met because of the rain. Ethan laughed. You ran into the cafe like the rain was chasing you. It was rain, Ryan. It was very serious rain. They both laughed. For a moment, they simply sat there. Ryan looked around the cafe. Nothing seemed particularly different. The same tables. The same windows. The same quiet music. But Ryan felt completely different. He remembered how uncertain he had been that first night. He had arrived in New York believing he was starting over alone. He never imagined that one rainy evening would introduce him to someone who would become so important. Ethan looked across the table. What are you thinking? Ryan smiled. About how different everything feels. Different in a good way. Definitely. Ethan nodded. I feel the same. Ryan looked down at his coffee. I was scared after we talked. Me too. I kept thinking that maybe we'd ruin the friendship. Ethan shook his head. I think being honest actually made it stronger. Ryan smiled. You're probably right. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Ethan said, You know what I like most about you? Ryan raised an eyebrow. What? You never pretend to be someone you're not. Ryan laughed. I definitely do sometimes. Everyone does. But you always come back to being yourself. Ryan thought about that. Maybe you helped with that. Ethan smiled. Maybe we helped each other. The evening continued peacefully. Before leaving, Ryan stood near the entrance and looked outside. The rain had started again. He laughed. Not again. Ethan stood beside him. Looks like the city is reminding us how this started. Ryan smiled. Should we run? Ethan shook his head. No. He opened his umbrella. We can walk. They stepped outside together. The streets reflected the lights of Manhattan, creating long patterns across the wet pavement. They walked slowly beneath the umbrella, talking about their plans. Ryan wanted to continue growing in his career. Ethan wanted to build a photography portfolio and eventually organize his own exhibition. They promised to support each other's goals, not with unrealistic promises, but with simple words that mattered. I'll be there, Ethan said. Ryan looked at him. Even when things get difficult? Especially then. Ryan smiled. Those words meant more to him than any grand declaration could have. As they reached the corner where they would go separate ways, Ryan stopped. Thank you. Ethan looked confused. For what? For walking into that cafe. Ethan laughed. I didn't walk into the cafe. You did. Then thank you for being there. Ethan smiled. I'm glad I was. They stood there for a moment before saying goodbye. Ryan walked home through the quiet streets. He thought about the journey that had brought him there. He had arrived in New York expecting a new job and new apartment. He hadn't expected a friendship that would challenge him to be honest about his feelings. He hadn't expected someone who would listen when he was afraid. And he certainly hadn't expected that an ordinary rainy evening would become the beginning of something so meaningful. When Ryan reached his apartment, he stood by the window and looked at the city. New York no longer felt like a place where millions of strangers lived. It felt like home. Not because the city had changed, because Ryan had changed. He had learned that sometimes the most important moments in life arrive without warning. A conversation. A meeting. A simple decision to step inside a cafe because of the rain. He smiled as his phone buzzed. A message from Ethan appeared. Good night, Ryan. I'm glad our paths crossed. Ryan smiled and replied. Good night, Ethan. Me too. He put the phone down and looked out at the lights once more. Their story had started with a chance meeting. But what came next would be built on something much stronger. Trust, honesty, friendship, and the courage to let someone become part of your life. And somewhere beneath the endless lights of New York City, Ryan finally understood something. Sometimes the best chapters of our lives begin when we least expect them. For Ryan, that chapter had begun the night he met Ethan.